Are you experiencing binge eating? And if so, what can you do about it? There are a lot of experiences that can leave us feeling completely out of control with food. And we might label these different things: addicted to food, emotional eating, binge eating, cheat days. All of these things can leave us feeling out of control with food, but they do not all have the same etiology. And we do not deal with some of these things in the same way. It's really important to know when you're feeling out of control with food, what is actually happening so you know how to deal with that situation without exacerbating it. My name is Shena, and I am a registered dietitian specializing in the care of persons with eating disorders. And if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, definitely click that subscribe button and the alert button so you don't miss any new episodes. Okay, so let's really dig into the differences that we often hear lumped into one sum when it comes to feeling out of control with food. So, the first one is going to be emotional eating. What is emotional eating? So, emotional eating is when we go for food as the result of a very intense or difficult emotion. Food is often used as a reward or a coping mechanism for a difficult emotion. So, thinking of something like you lost your job, or you're having a really difficult time in school, or you just got a promotion. So, the ironic thing about emotional eating is it can go either way when it comes to which emotion it is compensating for. It can be a really positive emotion, or it can be a really negative emotion. We can also utilize emotional eating when we are feeling we quote unquote deserve a reward for some specific behavior. Very important that we distinguish emotional eating from other eating behaviors such as binge eating and extreme hunger. The reason why is emotional eating in itself is a completely normal part of eating behavior and should not be involving any guilt, shame, and anxiety. This is a normal part of life with people with normal eating behaviors. And it is really important that we honor our emotional eating desires in order for that behavior to not become a disordered behavior or a type of food restriction. If we are doing this on occasion, as long as this is not happening with every emotion that we're having, emotional eating is a very healthy and normal part of anyone's daily lives and should be honored. Emotional eating, it can become problematic if we are finding ourselves turn to food for any emotion that we're having. So, for example, anytime that we feel like we have a difficult day, if we have some type of task that is looming in the future and we're going for food automatically, that can become problematic. So, really dig deep and see, do I have other coping tools for myself in addition to coping with food that are just as satisfying, or is emotional eating the only thing? Only time that emotional eating does become problematic is if we are going to food at all times for every difficult emotion. Now, this is very, very important to distinguish from these other behaviors that we're going to discuss, such as extreme hunger or binge eating behavior. The second one we're going to discuss is extreme hunger. Extreme hunger can happen for a multitude of reasons. To address is eating disorders or disordered eating behaviors. We often see extreme hunger following a very disordered relationship with food, and rightfully so. If we have been engaging in eating disorder behaviors, there is a good chance that we are extraordinarily malnourished at the time when we're beginning to experience extreme hunger. Now, this malnourishment can come in a multitude of forms. So it could be we've lost weight. It could be we are not meeting our macro and micronutrient needs. It could be we're starting to see organ and tissues start to adapt in a new way to compensate for a lower energy intake, such as we are experiencing low blood pressure, we might be experiencing some lab shifts. These are all things that might kind of warrant our body to amp up that hunger drive to compensate for any malnutrition in the body. And this goes for if we have or have not lost any weight. Well, even if we've lost weight and we're still in the quote unquote healthy BMI, we still can be experiencing many symptoms of malnutrition, which is going to cue the body into experiencing extreme hunger. It's very important that if you are experiencing extreme hunger, that you honor that hunger. There is a reason why you're experiencing that extreme hunger. And most of the time, it is for metabolic rebuilding and repair. And these things can be very critical for our health. So when we are experiencing extreme hunger, especially if we've experienced eating disorder behavior, that is because our body needs that energy and we need to honor that extreme hunger to keep ourselves safe. Another reason why you might be experiencing extreme hunger is if you are ongoing an extreme diet. So things like intermittent fasting or just prolonged extreme calorie restriction can often result in extreme hunger. While this might not be a full-fledged quote unquote eating disorder, it is often associated with extremely disordered behaviors around food. It puts our body into that scarcity zone and it causes us to really amp up our hunger drive, starting with our salivary amylase and how much salivation we're producing to make us crave and desire more food in order to compensate for these extreme dieting measures that we're having. So extreme hunger is just a biological process, and it is not the same thing as emotional eating or binge eating. Now, let's really dig into what binge eating is. The first thing I want to clarify is binge eating can be experienced if we are not honoring those cues associated with both emotional eating and extreme hunger. Those things may quickly turn into binge eating behavior. But the most important thing that we need to do when we're experiencing any of these things is actually really tune in, check in with ourselves, and ask ourselves, what is it that I am actually experiencing? Because labeling it is going to give us more power over how we're going to manage some of these very extreme desires around food. There are typically 4 things that are going to classify something as binge eating. So the first one is going to be having a larger than usual portion of food than most people would associate with the appropriate portion size for that food. It's really ambiguous and is not really a good indicator of whether a person is binging or not, but it might be a good clue into whether or not you're binging. The second one is, did you feel like you were in control of your body around that food at all times in which you were engaging with it? So, for example, did you feel like it was mandatory that you finish the plate or the bag of chips or whatever you were having? Did you feel like you could stop consuming that food at any point? Or did you feel like you were obligated to finish that food and there was an urgency to finish that food? Brings me to the third symptom of binge eating, which is, were you feeling like that food was urgent? Did you feel like you needed to have that food right now? Alongside with that, were you craving something extraordinarily specific? Did you feel like you needed to have that very specific food in order to feel fully satisfied, or could you have something similar and be just as satisfied? That urgency and the extreme hyper focus on a specific food is a good indicator that you might have engaged in a binge. Now, the very most important classification for whether this is a binge or simply extreme hunger or emotional eating is, how did you feel emotionally after that experience with the food? Were you feeling extreme guilt, shame, or anxiety? Were you feeling like you needed to compensate by maybe not having as much at the next meal? All of these things make it a good indicator that you were in fact engaging in binge eating behavior. Remember these three extremely different classifications of how we're experiencing food. The first one being emotional eating, the second one being extreme hunger, and the third one being binge eating. When you're having an experience with food, think about those classifications within each different scope of your experience with food and label it accordingly, because we're going to want to deal with each scenario very differently. We are not going to want to correct an emotional eating experience or an extreme hunger experience, no matter what society tells us about how much food we do or don't need. If we try to correct those things, they're going to likely lead to binge eating later on. With binge eating behavior, we're going to want to manage that very, very differently. So first off, we never try to get rid of the binge. Instead, we kind of try to do a full workaround where we're normalizing the meals and snacks throughout the day to let our body know that it is safe, it is going to get enough nourishment, and that it doesn't need to engage in this binge eating behavior. Oftentimes, disengaging from binge eating behavior can be a very long and tedious process that should be worked through with a dietitian, a therapist, and a physician on board, because there is oftentimes a very large element of restriction that is going alongside with engaging in binge eating behavior. In fact, all binge eating behavior does come with some element of food restriction. Now, this can be either mental restrictions, such as I shouldn't have those foods, I shouldn't have that much, whatever it is, or it could be an actual physical restriction to where we are limiting our food intake to, say, a certain number of hours per day, setting off limits of food, or setting off limit foods, whatever that restriction piece may be, that is what is leading to the binge eating. This is not the same scenario for things like extreme hunger and emotional eating, which are a normal biological part of eating behavior. I hope that this video was helpful for you. If so, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with a friend.